We're ready for some fun today because we're going on our drive with this guy. Gary Burden is here, and we're picking him up at his house, and we're going to be going through a lot of the hills and canyons of Los Angeles. And Gary, thank you so much for taking us to some of the places where your album covers happened, and houses of your friends through many, many years here. You know this guy's work. You just have to go to your album collection and look for Artwork or Gary Burden, and you will see some of this amazing work you've done over the years. So thank you so much for going out with us.
Cool, man. Well, I just want to say, being someone who lives in this town, it's my hometown, what they would say here is bienvenidos a Los Ángeles, la ciudad de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de Los Ángeles, which is the city of the Queen of the Angels.
Great. Well, let's go look at it.
Let's
Okay?
go, man.
Gary Burden, you are a Los Angelino. You've been here. Were your parents were here too?
No, not really. My parents were from Ohio, where I was born, but I only stayed a couple of weeks, and I never really went back. But my father came here because my father was involved in the film business as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent some time here, as a little kid, and then came back permanently in the 50s.
And in between, you were...
We had houses in Ohio and in Coral Gables, Florida, South Florida. So I mostly grew up in South Florida.
And you were persuaded by the photographs, the copy, the pictures, etc., that you belonged in the Marines at one point?
Well, yes. The thing is, I came from a very conservative family, and I didn't fit in. I don't know why it was chosen for me to be their kid, but I never fitted in. So at 16, I ran away from home and joined the Marine Corps. I had made my mother sign saying that I was a year older so I could get in. And I stayed in the Marine Corps for quite a while. I was a bad kid, basically.
Uh-huh.
And it was mostly because I didn't fit anywhere, and I didn't like anybody because they didn't like me. So.
Now, what was the transition for you to being in the Marines to living in? You were living in San Francisco?
No, I was living. I went to school in San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
at Berkeley, and so I lived in Sausalito, and I started it was when rock and roll was first starting. When in Berkeley, some of the early bands, like early iterations of Jefferson Airplane and things like that, they were starting to happen, and rock and roll was starting to happen. I used to listen to what was called race music
Uh-huh.
when I was a kid because I liked it, Anyway, so as I got involved in music, I never dreamt I would have this job. I actually went to school to be an architect, and that's how I got into rock and roll. Mama Cass of the Mamas and Papas, I met her, and she asked me to do a remodel of her home in Laurel Canyon. And so she's the one who said, Gary, you should make our new cover. You know how to design stuff. I don't know anything about that. I've never been interested in being a graphic artist or any of that stuff, but she insisted that I do it, and she was right. Mm. She handed me a career, which more than 40 years later I'm still doing,
Yes, indeed. And that was that the one with the sort of large size face pictures?
Where they were cut in half and
exactly.
Fold them over so the top of one face would be on the bottom of another.
Right.
Face. Yeah.
That was fun. That
was fun, but it was kind of like, I look at it now and it's a little embarrassing, but it was pretty honest,
Right. One of the things I've read about you working with people is you don't say you're designing an album for them. You're designing it for them. You're not designing it for you. You're not. It's their vision, and you're realizing it. Is that a pretty good way to put it?
Yes, sort of. I mean, sometimes it's my vision, but it's never my cover. It's always somebody else's cover, and I lend what I know how to do to them, and how to visualize the music, That's been my mission, is to, because I love music, I listen to music, and here's Jack Nicholson's house on the left. He has full-time, that security trailer.
Oh boy.
That's where Marlon Brando lived. It's where Roman Polanski had his episode with the young girl. Anyway, it's by introduction.
Right.
This road, when I was a kid, was where hot rodders used to race over Mulholland. Many people died on this road. Back in the day, I had during the time when the Beatles and a lot of different people in England had Mini Coopers, I bought a 67 Mini Cooper and totally tricked it out. I bored it out oversized, poured it and relieved the valves. I had like disc brakes on it when there were no disc brakes. It was like a really amazing little car, and I used to race it over this road, and I could beat anybody. It was like riding a power mower, because the engine is transverse in the front, and the back wheels are just there to hold the back seats up, So I would race Corvettes or Ferraris, whatever, over here, and I'd blow them all off with this little tiny Mini Cooper,
They wouldn't see it coming.
They wouldn't see me going, But yeah, it's this is like the spine of the ridge that separates the west side or the flatlands from the valley on the other side. And when you're a Southern California person, or for me anyway, as a kid, I grew up on beaches always, and I was a surfer. And the last thing you wanted to associate yourself with was anything to do with the valley. It's kind of like a different world over there.
Describe it. I mean, it's obviously it's flat, it's extensive. It's not Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, it's flat in every way. It doesn't have much soul or spirit. Now it's a little different, but in the day, it was mostly like factory workers, really boring people, and nobody that you wanted to emulate or be a part of. And so, Val's go home was the motto, at the beach where I grew up.
So, Gary, when you met, getting back to your story, when you met Mama Cass, and you were working as an architect, what were you like, and what did you think of this environment?
I wore three-piece suits with bow tie, and I used to sneak to smoke pot and be groovy, and otherwise I was a pretty conservative guy. And suddenly, in the course of doing the house for Cass, I met all of her friends. I met Crosby, I met Neil, I met Steven, all these different people who were living a life that I had only dreamt of before. They were all like potheads, and not only were they living that great life, but they were getting paid handsomely for doing it. So I went, wow, this is pretty cool. So I blew off my three-piece suit and never looked back. And here I am. It's like, that was kind of like when I was born, the real me. Before that, I was living somebody else's idea of who I should be,
Back to you as a control freak and working with Henry.
Oh, yes. Excuse me. So I like to do everything when I make a piece of art, but I never could take the pictures because I was very intimidated by the camera. Like, what if I forget to put the film in and I've done a big session and then I have nothing? What if I get the exposure wrong? Because I didn't know how to do it. So I would hire photographers, and then I would micromanage them to help me realize my vision. Henry was the longest person I worked with, and we did a lot of stuff, a lot of great stuff. I also worked with Joel Bernstein, and just a very few people who did all the pictures for me.
One of the things about your album covers, and maybe you can describe this better than I can, obviously these are all album cover size, but there's a lot of texture in what you do. Even an album cover that is a simple photograph, going back to the Crosby, Stills and Nash first album cover, there's texture to it, and I mean texture to the photography, texture to the paper. You clearly have a reverence for that.
paper is my thing. It's just like when I was doing architecture, materials were very important to me. Not just structurally, but for what the feel they created in a space. And so when I started doing artwork and doing printing, paper was the medium. And so I was known pretty much for making the record to the left. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not hard left, because that'd be kind of a bumpy ride. But I was kind of known for being a pain in the ass with the labels, making them spend money that they never had spent before. When I did that cover, the CSN cover,
Yes.
typically they spent like 8 cents for a whole cover, all in. That cover cost 25 cents. And the Atlantic Records went completely ballistic. Ahmet Ertegun, Jerry Wexler, and Nestle Ertegun, Ahmet's brother, cornered me in a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel and told me in no uncertain terms that what I wanted was never going to happen, and so get over it. And I went, okay, fine, no problem. And of course, all I had to do is say that to Stephen and Graham, and they had all the power. So they said, hey, fuck you, we're doing this, and you're paying for it. So paper, yes, and it's cool that you recognize that, because I love texture. I love things that feel and that speak to you visually as a texture, and in your hand. When you feel it, you can feel this texture that sets a tone in a way, you know. Right across the street there is Woodrow Wilson Drive.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Cass lived. And Cass was like the Gertrude Stein of rock and roll. She had a salon in her home, and most of the people that I met in her living room, you know. And it was a family. What I would say is, and it's probably true still, rock and roll in the 60s and 70s was not that many people like it is now. And it was a family. Everybody knew each other. People would write together. People would sing together. People would play on each other's records. And it was all very family oriented, you know, because most of these young guys had come from other parts of the world where they, just like myself, they didn't really fit in their own family. So together we created a new family of our own, and it was lovely. I mean, just incredible.
Gary Burden, we've made the turn on to Laurel Canyon Boulevard.
Yep.
And maybe talk a little bit about this
Well,
area.
I used to drive this road very high on acid in my Mini, going down to the deli to get food at Greenblatt's to bring back up to Cass's house. And this road was like going like this in my eyes. Of course, as fast as I could go. And Laurel Canyon is an interesting place. It used to be, back in the teens and 20s, it was raw nature, and people would come here to go spend the weekend in the nature and go hunting, deer hunting. And so I'm going to show you at Lookout Canyon Drive, or Lookout Road. There's a big log cabin. It was Tom Mix's, the Western Star. It was his house where he lived when it was country. And then later in the 60s and 70s, it was Frank Zappa's house. So he lived there. And then right across the street from that is Houdini's old mansion, the remnants of that, when Houdini was living up here.
Why don't we pull off and take a closer look at this?
Okay, so this is different than it was. Somebody's added all this iron gates and frou-frou, but that was the road up to Houdini's mansion. And he probably came here because this was, like I said earlier, this was the wilds. This was big-time nature, and it was very quiet. And you can see it's still, here it is in the 21st century, and it's still, it's pretty natural.
A little more traffic, but that's about it.
Yeah,
Really, honestly.
Yeah. Well, this used to be a carriage road, you know, for horse and buggies and that sort of thing. still pretty beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're seeing it at the absolute optimum time because of the rains, and now it's green, which is not its natural state. Right here is where Tom Mix's log cabin was, where Frank Zappa lived. And look out Mountain Drive, I can't remember what the real name of it is Elliot Roberts, like Joni Mitchell's house was right behind that wall, right there, right in there. In fact, there it is, right there.
Wow.
Joni Mitchell's house. Further up the road was Jackson Browne's house, and then next to that was Elliot Roberts' house. Elliot is still Neil's manager.
And it's Lookout Management, right?
Yeah, and Lookout Management, named for this street that we're driving on right now. So I want to say that it's like maybe a little bit of a stretch, but there was I was talking about if we had a family. Well, there was also a community, and so a lot of these people lived in the same general little area, which was Laurel Canyon.
Gary, I didn't realize how close everybody was to each other.
Yeah.
It's really unbelievable. They're all in the same street.
And it's funny because I think before the 60s, this was like, back in the old days, it was the country and people who came here to get away from downtown LA. But in the 60s and 70s, I think that's when Laurel Canyon particularly, I could be wrong about this, but I think that's when Laurel Canyon became a famous place. And it was because of all the musicians who lived here, who found this to be like paradise, because it's like 20 minutes from here to the Troubadour or to the Whiskey A Go-Go where they played. And so they would retire to these places. There are famous stories about like people would synchronize dropping the needle on Let It Be, for example, and crank their stereos to 12. And a lot of different people around the canyon would do that. And so the sound would echo out through the canyon coming from all these various sources, all tuned to the same music,
That's a great image.
Henry actually said, yeah, I remember one time we all synchronized flushing the toilet at the same time. Here we go. This is the canyon store. This was always a very famous place where people would come and just sit around outside and hang out.
Still do.
Yeah, I mean hippies with no homes would come and just hang out at the canyon store. So you might want to shoot this place over here across the street where Jim Morrison.
To tell you the truth, we were just there this morning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, we got actually a full tour.
You guys are way hip, man.
So, yeah.
Anyway.
What an incredible house that is, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
what an incredible guy he was.
Yes. Oh, indeed.
He was. I was always a fan, and I met him many times at the Whiskey when the Doors were like the house band there. And turns out his wife, Pamela Corson, and my wife at the time had grown up together and went to elementary and junior high and high school together. So we had this other reason to become good friends. And in those days, I was a big drinker, and so was he. So we became drinking buddies. We both loved movies and all that. And so what an amazing person he was. Mm-hmm. It's one of the high points of my life, having been a good friend with him.
Good friend with him, good friend with Neil Young, who you still work with. Is that part of what you is that necessary for what you do? Or is it?
I don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
I think of it like I love these guys.
Yeah.
And they're my peeps, we have so much in common that we can share. In those days, people who were together were fucking really together, like good, close hookups, And it was like that. And Neil, I've been making his artwork for 45 years. And he's like maybe my best friend. He was my best man when I got married. We spend a lot of time together. I was just with him a couple days last week.
There's the auteur theory of films, like you can tell the director's work, and your work with Neil is a good way of throwing that out, because his albums are all very different, and your work on each and every one of them is very, very different too.
Well, we're not only good friends, but we're collaborators. He trusts me to share a vision and to make something happen, and it goes the other way for me. Like, I don't give myself up to just anybody. But he and I have developed this trust, and it sort of happened right away when I first met him at Cass's house. And I had seen him playing at the Whiskey, but he was always very unapproachable. So I never got to know him until at Cass's house. And then we didn't really do anything right away. It was pretty much years later that I finally made a cover with him. But we like working together.
The package that you won your Grammy for, the archives, the box, the cube, that was a collaboration, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, the thing is, my wife is a painter, but she works with me doing album covers, and on that particular case, I decided to share that with Neil. So she and I are the art directors and designers, and Neil is a part of our team. So we all won Grammys that year, and it was the first time, surprisingly, that Neil had ever won a Grammy. After all those years, he never had won a Grammy for music, and he was actually, people referred to him as a Grammy grouch, because any opportunity he had to badmouth the Grammys or Norris, he would do it, because he thought they were corrupt and that they didn't really honor. They honored things because of their connections to the people who did it, instead of how good or bad it was. I mean, hey, the fact that guy never won a Grammy in all those years is pretty amazing.
In terms of locations for your covers and your shooting, of course, the Jim Morrison hotel shot, that is a building. A lot of these buildings are no longer there, right?
That hotel is still there, and I'm going to show you, actually. You asked for a location. I'm going to show you where we shot the CSN cover.
Excellent.
And it's going to be just down the street from the Whiskey. When we came to make the Crosby, Stills and Nash cover, I had been out driving around in this area. I lived just a few blocks down the hill from here, and so I used to drive around here, and this was all like working class people's little. You want to make a left at the light, Kim, where they had little cottages, little bungalows and stuff. And so I wanted a place to take this picture of CSN that was kind of funky, and like funky, in a word.
Yeah.
And so I found this great little house. It was so beautiful, and some old person was living in this house, and you could tell that they didn't have any money, and they were not able to really keep the place up, because there was the landscape was a lot of weeds and old furniture in front of the house, including an old couch and a chair. And I thought, oh God, this is perfect. Tobacco Road in West Hollywood. And so I brought Graham down and showed him the house, and he went, oh yes, I'll get it, mate. All right. So we decided this would be the place we'd shoot the band. At that time, they were not named yet. They jokingly, we referred to them as the Frozen Noses. But after we shot the image, it was they named themselves Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And of course, if on the cover they're out of order, it's Nash, Stills, and Crosby.
That notoriously out of order. Yes.
Yes, and Crosby complains, oh, people would always come up to me and say, Mr. Nash, so nice to meet you. and so we decided, okay, well, so we'll just go back tomorrow and reshoot it, and you guys can sit in the proper order. Well, we came back. This is an old story, everybody knows probably, but You're hearing it firsthand from the guy who was there. We came back. We pulled up in front of this little cottage, and it was fucking gone. It was not there. It was like back at the back of the lot was a stack of wood and building materials. They had bulldozed it and just pushed it back out of the way, you know. And so we obviously decided that was God telling us that we should go with what we had. And so we did. So here we are on Palm Avenue, and the CSN house was, you can pull into that driveway on the left. Yeah, pull in that parking lot. The house was right here.
Really?
Yeah, right there.
Ah. That's one of the things we find we do on this show is take a lot of pictures of parking lots where things used to be.
Is that right?
Yeah, we do.
One of the first covers I ever made was a cover for Steppenwolf, because the label that the Mamas and Papas were on, which was the first label I ever worked for.
Dunhill, right?
Dunhill Records, exactly. Steppenwolf was on their label, as was Three Dog Night. And Three Dog Night, those guys lived further up Laurel Canyon, up Lookout, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But Steppenwolf, I made all of their first like 4 or 5 covers. And one of the first ones I did was right up ahead in Beverly Hills on the right-hand side. It's the Cactus Garden. And being that it was a pretty trippy period, I shot it with infrared film so that the green cactuses all looked pink and fleshy. And then I printed it no further. I printed it on silver foil so that it was like really reflective and trippy.
Yeah,
you know?
I remember that cover.
Those guys were interesting dudes.
Mm.
So there's the whiskey.
Oh yeah.
When I did my, I did a show of this book.
Mm-hmm.
When I made that book, it was when I did a collaboration with a Canadian paper company, and they had come up with a new line of environmentally friendly papers, and so we did a tour, and that book was a part of the tour, and we did shows all across country with the music of the era, and that I had worked on. And also, I had these guys I knew in San Francisco come, and they would do like old school light shows, and paper buyers and customers and artists would come to those shows. And the first one was at the Whiskey. You pull into the parking lot right there to your left, yeah. And the first one was at the Whiskey, and I remember when they put my name up there in the
You'd never been on.
How fucking cool is that, man?
So Gary, here we are in front of the Whiskey. How is this any different? Is this the same?
It's continuously changing. Architecturally, it's the same. The paint jobs change. You know?
Right.
That's pretty much. And it's interesting that places like this survive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I've been through this different doors, but I've been through this same entrance 50 years ago, and there it is, and here I am. You know, that's something that fascinates me now.
They survive doing things a little differently in some ways.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah. You wouldn't have a week of a band doing like the Buffalo Springfield would do, or
the Doors.
Yeah, the Doors. Yeah.
No, it's true, but I guess what's kept them alive is that they didn't get locked in on any one thing, but they went with the flow of what was happening, what the people wanted, you know. I mean, this place is still an amazing place, and the guy who owned it, Elmer Valentine, you heard of it? He was like a famous guy here, you know, and he brought this to life in a big way and kept it alive. And then down the street a couple of blocks, he and David Geffen and Elliot Roberts and some other people opened the Roxy, which is another amazing place.
Which was a standard at the time. I remember when it opened.
Yeah.
It was like,
Were you there for the opening?
no, I wasn't, but
Because Neil played that
yes,
opening.
yeah.
I also, the only time I ever saw Bob Marley live was when he first started happening in the States, and he played the Whiskey. I mean, not the Whiskey, he played the Roxy. It was like, man, that was like, it was like going to church, you know? Just, wow.
First and foremost, a music fan. There you go.
That is it. Me too.
Yeah.